Good, now turn on this coil. Bam! That coil.
Cool. Your brain waves do this. Yes. Help with the aging solfeggio frequencies.
Cycles of fifth.
Hi, folks. Yeah, we did it. It's been quite a journey today, putting all of this together. And so I'd like to thank you for coming. My name's Roger Green, and I've been a business colleague of Paul for about 15 years.
Great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out. We've had a busy fall this year. We just got back from doing the Breakthru conference in South France with the Theraphi, and it was a great turnout and a great group. And yeah, we're looking forward to next year in Kelowna, and we've already picked out a really nice venue for that. So my name's Paul Harris. I basically grew up as one of the strange kids in school, didn't really participate in sports or anything like that, spent my time in the library and tinkering with things, and so that's kind of my background. I teach classes on practical alchemy, esoteric philosophy, sacred geometry, and I do esoteric electronic things. So that's kind of a bit about me. The Quantaphi is the latest device that we're going to talk about here today, and it actually uses a combination of several different things, including primarily sound, but treating sound with in a unique way. So there was a fellow, Edgar Casey, I'm sure you're all familiar with, who said many great things, and this one's really nice. He said, "Sound will be the medicine of the future." Because everything, as we've grown up with in the age of quantum mechanics and everybody talking about the latest cutting-edge understanding of science, how we're starting to realize that the ancient philosophers and the spiritual teachers and everything were right when they talked about, that was like the primary principle of understanding the cosmos, was that everything is a vibration and everything's in motion. And it goes back to all the ancient religions all spoke of how the creation stories all involved light and sound. And the first project in this sort of series was the Theraphi, and as Roger said, it's become quite popular all around the world. I don't know how many different countries, but probably 20 different countries you can find a Theraphi and a Theraphi center in. This is version 5, it's the latest version, and you can see it utilizes Tesla technology, basically. There's a large coil that's sort of a more obscure type of a Tesla coil that's used underneath the bed, and it incorporates a combination of several different things. There's sort of a field generated, electromagnetic field generated from the coil, and these two plasma tubes that are specially designed to deliver a really unique signature of frequencies that was derived by Dan Winter and based on Planck's length and phi ratio. And the idea behind this project was basically to see if we could create a bioactive field and run Dan's frequencies through there and see if it had any healing effects. And we talked a lot about, over the years, about time reversal waves and the phase conjugation incorporated into the tubes, and so it's been quite successful, and there's lots of great information and photos of people using it out on the internet and that, so it's been really fun. So this is the latest system. It's sort of one of the things a lot of people asked about. The Theraphi is more like a clinical model. It has a bit more power. And as I said, it kind of came out and it evolved through that history. And a lot of people said, "Oh, when are you going to make a little home version, something we can take home?" And so a lot of people asked that over the years. And I said, "Oh yeah, it's coming." And I was always working on it. in the background and been pretty busy, so it kept getting bumped and bumped and bumped. And finally this year we did the European release in France, South France, and so this is really the official North American release, I suppose. And yeah, it's pretty fun. It utilizes 2 miniature Tesla coils. These are solid state Tesla coils. Really, these would be Tesla's dream, because back in Tesla's days, you know, it was really hard to make a switch. You've probably, if you're familiar with Tesla coils, there was always a spark gap, and you had to manage the spark gap in order to control the frequency. You had to have the right spacing. You had to quench this really high current charged spark gap, which gave the timing to the coils. But nowadays we have these amazing new components. Because in Tesla's days, this is of course before the transistor. Vacuum tubes were just coming out back then, and of course Tesla worked a lot with different plasma lighting tubes and things like that. We'll talk a bit about today. So he was always one of my childhood heroes. When I was young and went to school, there wasn't a lot of information about Tesla. It's not like today. There was no internet back then, amazingly. And even when you went to the library and stuff, you really just found a rare chapter in an encyclopedia or something about Tesla. And whenever you asked any of the teachers or anything, they were like, oh, I don't know who this guy was. You should look at Thomas Edison. He was the guy who invented the light bulb. So Edison really got all the credit. And it wasn't until really the internet came along in the 90s, and there was a real resurgence in understanding what Tesla, who he was and what he did. And of course the Tesla car company that everybody knows now has really popularized the name. So I'm really glad that Tesla's having this amazing resurgence. And he actually said in his time, he said, I'm not building these things for my time now because nobody really understands it. I'm building this for 100 years from now. That's what he said. And this is 100 years later, folks, and look at how right he was in so many things. I remember in his Colorado Springs in 1890s, his notes, he said, you know, one day I envision, I don't know why we're stringing these wires all across the country for telegraphs and things like this. One day I envision a device that fits in your pocket, holds encyclopedias worth of information. You can communicate with full pictures and sound to anybody all around the world. In 1890, so Tesla was talking about this cell phone right here. Silly phone. So, okay, so yeah, the Quantaphi is unique in that you got a lot of different variations that you can play with the coils with, and it utilizes these plasma tubes. They're basically like vacuum tubes, and there's no internal electrodes or anything like this. They operate wirelessly. Compared to the Theraphi uses what Tesla called single wire transmission. And it's quite unique in itself because another popular character that came about in the 90s in a resurgence was Royal Raymond Rife. And up till, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, again, another character in history that just got swept under the carpet and nobody had heard about. And so I kind of followed all of his work as it came about, and I was building all kinds of different Tesla coils and things like that at that time. And my dream was to build a tube, because I always knew that, so your standard Rife tube has an anode and a cathode and plasma tube, and you would sit in the proximity of this tube, and your body would absorb the radiation from this tube. And Rife was targeting viruses, bacteria, pathogens, and things like this that could be destroyed with this device, utilizing certain frequency sets inside of these large tube amplifiers, basically. And so I was really keen on that. My idea was I wanted to build a tube big enough to get somebody right in between the anode and the cathode, because that's the sweet spot. That's where the null point or the 0 point, the counter space is. And the Theraphi evolved from that, and basically the original idea was to build a big MRI tube, basically, and you would machine like an MRI. So a massive tube that you could slide somebody in on the bed and inside of the center of the tube and have this plasma tube all around them. That was a little expensive. So I came up with this idea of splitting the tubes with a single wire transmission and adjusting the phases so the phases shifted on each end of the tubes, and it sloshes up and down sort of like two buckets of water going up and down. And it worked. When I first set it up in the lab, did about a 3-minute session, and I sat on there, and I had a pretty good feel for different plasma type devices that I've built over the years. And in 3 minutes, I was like, okay, I'm done. This is good. This is amazing. It's powerful. It seems pretty interesting. So we put it out there, and we gathered sort of just empirical data coming in from people to see what it was doing. And it turned out to be pretty amazing when people would call you up at night and be crying on the phone saying how it helped their father with his bad hip, and a lot of interesting results came from it. So it just kind of evolved into what it is now, and the Theraphi is sort of a new extension, like I was saying, how people want a home version and they want to play. And there's all kinds of neat little things you can do with these tubes. So the new tubes don't have the single wire transmission, although you can do that. You can add a wire onto there and then use the tube straight onto your body. But you can also stand in proximity to the coil. Let's say you wanted to work on your shoulder or something like this. You can hold the tubes up there. And what's really interesting as well is these tubes work in the Theraphi field as well. So they'll light up just wirelessly in the field. So you can use them in the table with the newer version, or if we crank this one up a little bit, you get them to light up all the way in here. But yeah, just by proxy, they work quite nice. So you can use these in combination with the Theraphi or with these themselves, the Quantaphi itself. And you can build these antenna arrays. So basically, antennas are what we use to transmit and receive signals, and there's a whole field of being able to utilize plasma as an antenna. And it turns out it works really good for propagating waves. And primarily what we're doing here is creating longitudinal waves with the Tesla coils. There is an electrostatic field that surrounds the coils. In the Quantaphi, it comes with 2 coils, so you can run them in stereo, basically. And one of the things that came about through playing around with this is that I'm a bit of an audiophile and have a large collection of audio equipment and things like this, and play guitar and keyboards and stuff like that. So one of the things I started to notice when turning on the field was that the sound seemed to be enhanced. And at the beginning, I said on the slide there, everything is better in the field. And so far, another thing I did the other day was I was eating, and I had my dinner plate, and I had the Quantaphi set up and the chair in the center, and it was on, and I sat down, and I started eating the food, and I realized that all of a sudden, I could taste more flavor in the food, and the food tasted more vital, like it actually was energized. And part of the things the reason why we don't put metal in the field is because metal will distort the field. When you have metallic objects, that's why all this stuff doesn't have metal in there. When you have metallic objects in there, you'll actually distort the fields that are created by these coils. So the fork that I was eating was metal, and it had like a charge on it. I could feel it almost like a 9-volt battery on my tongue, right? So that charge was going into the food, and when it hit my taste buds, it tasted better. So this term came up. Everything is better in the field. So what's happening? There's a lot of. It gets really complicated, and there's a lot of interesting things happen. And you've probably seen a lot of my other talks where basically we live in an electrical universe. This is all purely electrical phenomenon. We'll get into a little bit more today, but there's a lot of really interesting things happen to things when you add a charge to it. And so the Theraphi or the Quantaphi enables you to be able to get in between the tubes again, and it's a fairly different configuration than the way the Theraphi is working, but it is also sort of open source as far as the input signals go. So you can run anything you want into there. You can put frequency generators and play music through it. On the amplifier itself, you have a USB stick. You can put MP3s on there, FLAC files, APEs. You can Bluetooth to it. You can put an SD card. So there's all kinds of inputs that you can run into it. RCA jacks on the back, and BNC connectors. So I mean, literally, the sky's the limit for what you want to put into the system. And it works by creating a coherent field. And the thing about music and sound and everything like that is coherence. And we talk a lot about that because to get the cleanest signal and everything, you want the most coherent waveforms that you can get. So it's basically the difference between, digital is a big thing these days, and we've got a lot of digital equipment and digital Wi-Fi routers and things like this. And what you get with digital signals is not really pure. You'll have to go back to more analog things, like the difference between a CD and or an MP3, let's say, and because CDs are gone now, I suppose, but a lot of people are using that compressed digital music format, and it just doesn't sound as good as an album. Albums have made this great resurgence with the vinyl now. That's a pure, smooth analog wave, and audiophiles have always been into that, and it's part of what makes a tube amplifier really sound good, and it has the warmth and everything like this, because anytime you have a vacuum tube, the way the energy is transferred in the vacuum tube smooths out those waveforms really nice. So you can take a digital noisy MP3 or a CD or whatever and run it through a tube amplifier, and all of a sudden it sounds a lot better. So that's what's really happening with the tubes, is making things more coherent. So the plasma on the Tesla coils is also doing that. And if we go back in time, of course, all the creation stories really talk about sound and light being the beginning of creation. So in the book of Genesis, God said, "Let there be light." So first was the Word, He vocalized it, "Let there be light." In the Gospel according to John, the beginning there was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then we also see the same thing in the Vedas. So all these groups have kind of, independently came up with these same stories, or have they adopted it from other ones? Obviously, you can see that there's a long tradition of these kind of things. In the Vedas, the beginning was Brahman, with who was the Word, and the Word was Brahman. Ancient Egyptians also, the Egyptian god Thoth created the whole world and the entire cosmos with his voice. In the Hopi legends of the Spider Woman, she sang the song of creation into the inanimate forms of earth and brought them to life. The Australian Aboriginals, everything was created with the didgeridoo. All kinds of African tribes have all their sound creation stories. The Mayan Papavol, life was given solely through the power of word. And in Polynesia, the gods struck gongs or blew on conch shells to create the world. So it seems to be a common underlying theme that this sound is a big part of the whole creation of anything. So when you think of music and creativity and everything like this, and how inspirational it is for people and what a big part of our life it is, it's obvious that sound plays a key role. And there's tons of research that shows all kinds of different biological functions that happen with the body when exposed to music and sound. And sound therapy has become a very big thing. So you can look at changes in heart rate, respiration, EEG, body temperature. Music influences the immune system, the endocrine function, and it's been used for pain, anxiety, nausea, fatigue, depression, and music therapy is just a really big thing. Works with great with ADD children and all kinds of things like that. And you've all experienced, the feeling of music. You listen to a good classical symphony or whatever your style of music is, or a good rock band, you know that your body is producing these chemicals. Your body is your inner pharmacy is far greater at producing chemicals that will work in your favor than external pharmacies. And the plants are the same thing too. So plants are just little chemical warehouses that produce all these phytonutrients in the same way. And so sound therapy, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the crystal bowls and the gongs. And this goes back to, ancient times. The Tibetan bowls, these things are made out of, amalgams of 7 different metals. And they managed to be able to get them so when you ring them, they get multiple tones. So you get these offbeat tones in there. And you can produce binaural beats. And the binaural concept got really popular back in the 80s, where you could listen to stereo headphones and listen to one frequency, let's say 1 kilohertz tone in one ear, and then 1.1 kilohertz in the other ear, and you get that 100 hertz offbeat tone that's going. Your brain is actually making that up through the differential in your brain. Everything in the whole universe runs in this duality system. We live in this duality universe. And the hemispheres of our brain are no different. So it's really has a lot to do with how the frequencies are running in these devices and how you're doing. So one of the ideal things with the Quantaphi is you have 2 channels that you can play with. So if you have a frequency generators, you can, or any of the recordings of any of these kind of devices, you can play with the frequencies to produce binaural beats to hit very specific states in your mind. And this is all sort of psychotronics, You can have a lot of influence over not only, your psychological states, but emotional states and producing all these various different chemicals within your bodies too. So tuning forks are another big healing modality. Chanting, which goes back to ancient times, classical music. And there's been just tons of studies on how all these things influence the body. So the idea behind the Quantaphi was to basically be able to incorporate the power of sound along with the power of light into a device that you could sit in front of and produce some of these same effects, and then take them a lot deeper. So with the amplifier the way it is, it's kind of a modern day version. It's a very efficient amplifier, very clean. In the beginning, amplifiers, of course, were ran with tubes. This is the first tube amplifier that uses the Audion tube. And this was back in Tesla's day. This was one of the very first tubes, was a triode. That was called the Audion, and it was invented by this Lee DeForest fellow. And so basically what I've done with the Quantaphi is taken this idea of amplifying sound and adding a whole lot more power to it with a Tesla coil. Not this big, but it can be done. It can be done. The nice thing about these miniature ones is they're a lot higher frequencies. So this coil, for instance, it runs at about 1.2 kilohertz, and it's pretty loud and noisy, and it's like bang, bang, bang. Whereas as we got higher in frequency, the smaller these coils are, the higher the frequency is, and that takes away a lot of the noise out of the coil. As soon as you get above 1 megahertz or so, you start to lose a lot of that noise, so the fidelity gets higher. And the other thing that wasn't available in Tesla's time was being able to modulate audio signals in the coils, which is what these coils are essentially doing. So as you have 2 independent channels, the modulation goes into the carrier wave of the coil, and that modulates the plasma in these fields. So part of what makes a Tesla coil really unique as opposed to other transformers is it's an air core transformer. That's what makes a Tesla coil. So the transformers that you generally have in the little wall plugs that you plug on your wall that are in all your other appliances, and that they have like an iron core in them. That iron core sort of gets saturated. You have hysteresis in there. It gives off heat. That's another thing about the old tube amps is they took a lot of power to fire those guys up, right? You needed big transformers and you put a lot of juice into them. And that made for great sound, but it was also super inefficient. You can heat your house with a good sized tube amp, and I do. They give off a lot of heat, so they're very inefficient. So you get a lot of heat coming off to produce the sound, whereas with the modern switching technology that we have in modern day components, as with the ones that are in the Quantaphi, very little heat, more like 95% efficient rather than 20% efficient, and you get a very clean sound as well. So that's kind of a little bit about the background of the amplification side of things, as well as the inputs. Then what can you put into the Theraphi? So one of the, if for anybody that's into electronics and things, they'll recognize a basic function generator where you can generate a square wave, a sine wave, a triangle wave, and those are the basic waveforms that make up sound. And we'll play some for you now because I'll fire this up. And each of these waveforms has different effects on the body. When in the early days of building some of the more modern Rife machines, what I used to do is take apart ham radio transmitters just to get the power. So you take like a 300 watt ham radio transmitter amplifier that was capable of talking to somebody in Japan, right, from here. So that's how much power these amplifiers had. So instead of using it to go up an antenna on your roof and talk to somebody in Japan, we take the ends off of those and drive them straight into plasma tubes. So all that energy was being absorbed by the noble gases that were in the plasma. And we found that different waveforms had different effects. And over the years, there was quite a few people experimenting with this, and today there's massive lists of Rife frequencies. Even though Rife in his time only had about 12 original frequencies that were the true frequencies that he was using, this sort of anecdotal data that's been gathered over the years, there's thousands and thousands, and I'll show you some of those in a second, but just to give you an idea of what these things sound like, this is a basic sine wave, the classic sine wave that's on there, and you'll recognize the tone if I can hit this. So that type of sound, and usually we use like 1 kilohertz for a test tone. So close to here, I don't know if I can nail it right on with this little slider. But you've heard those test tones in the old days in radio and TV, you heard that. This is a square wave. So do you feel the difference in that? You feel the difference between a sine wave is the nice smooth wave, more like the analog vinyl. Everybody hear that okay? And then digital is made up of square wave pulses. So this is what a square wave feels like. Now you feel the difference between those two, right? It's much more pleasant. It's more like a piano or an organ. Square wave is more like... And so we used to use the square waves to target viruses, bacteria, and pathogens, and what Rife called hitting the mortal oscillating rate of a particular pathogen that you wanted to get. And it was literally like an opera singer with a wine glass, where you just overpower it with that hammering square wave until the cell actually ruptured. And you could literally take like a plepharisma or something and put it on a slide and put it in a little bit of water, and you watch it zip around. These are highly motile little species, single-celled organisms, and you hit it with the right frequency and it stops and it goes, oh, what's going on? And it starts to jiggle, and then you see the cell wall start to bubble, crank up the power a little bit more, and you see the cell wall explode and all the contents of the cell just spill out onto the slide. So with the right amount of power and the right frequency signature, what we were doing was hitting the exact right resonance of that thing to destroy it. And the square waves worked really well for that. That's why you feel that agitatedness of it. So here's a triangle wave. It has a different feel to it altogether. And so those are the three primary waveforms that make up a lot of music. And in the early days of analog equipment, when the first synthesizers were invented, I have a little Moog DFAM that I picked up here that we'll play with a little bit later on. But these sort of analog synthesizers use purely analog circuitry to generate these tones, and that's primarily how they work. They were a function generator at the beginning. You had your voltage controlled oscillator, they called it, and then you went through all kinds of filters and you modified those different waveforms to produce all kinds of different sounds. And that became all the popular synthesizer music that you heard all through the 60s and 70s. And then as time evolved, we started chopping those waveforms up into digital sound. So what we did to produce digital sound was we took that clean sine wave and we produced it into stairs. So the data information made little steps, and they're all incremental values. So when you have a digital sound, to emulate a sine wave, you still have to go and then we got technology and switching transistors that worked fast enough to smooth it out so you couldn't hear that anymore. But that digital noise is basically what we've based all our modern day equipment, your computer, your Wi-Fi router, all your cell phones, all your technology runs on that. And one of the issues about digitalness is that there's a lot of incoherency. Remember we talked about being coherent, and how the coherent waveforms were more natural and more soothing to the body, just like when you felt the sine wave and how that felt. The square waves is what your Wi-Fi router is emitting, what your cell phone's emitting, what your computer is running on. And they're so high frequency you don't hear them, but your body and your cells definitely resonate to them, right? This has been a big question, and we'll get into a little bit about that later on, because that's another interesting application that we're going to see we can do with the Quantaphi. You can also put lots of different software. So there's all kinds of software that people have built for running these frequencies for healing purposes that you can download apps on your phone, lots of programs on your computer. This one is Dan and Patrick's app, and it utilizes sound entrainment it comes also, you can utilize to monitor your brain waves with at the same time, and then play different sounds and watch your brain respond to those sounds. So it's a really cool app that you can plug right into the Quantaphi and be able to produce those sounds and watch your brain, how it responds to that. Then there's a lot of Rife type devices out there. And a lot of people call any kind of frequency generator that you can use for direct skin contact Rife machines. Rife was really originally using plasma tubes, and later on, and actually those contact type Rife devices started off before Rife's time with just general contact electrical zapping devices. And you'd hold on to these two electrodes and it'd produce a pulsing current through your body, and you could change the frequency of that, and there was all kinds of amazing effects that it would have. So this one is sort of a modern day version that is really slick because it has a function generator that's capable of producing all those different waveforms and being able to combine them in special ways, like using a fancy signal generator like this one. And it's all done with a computer interface. And what they've done is they've taken all those empirical lists of frequencies that we've gathered over the years and put it into the database, so you can just type in an ailment. You can type in spinal meningitis into this thing, and it'll give you the frequencies that people have worked with in order to target that particular ailment. So basically you can take the Spooky 2 straight out, and instead of holding on to the handheld electrodes, you can connect it right into the back of the Quantaphi, and you can play the sound, and not all of these sounds are going to sound nice. So you can experiment with that, and you have the option of turning down the sound and just running the coils and the plasma tubes with it. So that's what I would recommend for most of these kind of things. And it's fun to play with the sound, but when you run those frequencies through the plasma, what's happening is you're in this field, and it's an electrostatic field. The unique things about the Tesla coils being air core transformers is there's no metal in the core to interfere with being able to create high pressure waves. So we have this, we call it capacitive reactance is something that happens. So you have a capacitor. The three basic elements in an electronic circuit are a resistor that resists flow. You have a coil that is called an inductor that is able to induce power and it'll charge up and discharge, and a capacitor that stores energy like a battery and discharges it. Those three components form the basic RLC circuit that a Tesla coil is. And we call it tank circuit. And basically what it does is you can put frequencies into it and it'll fire up and then collapse, fire up and collapse, and fire up and collapse. Just like a lot of the frequencies we've been talking about here. And so you can resonate that fire up and collapses at different frequencies. And what that does is it shoots sort of a wave, different waveforms. You get an electromagnetic, the standard electromagnetic waveforms that has a voltage and a current at 90 degrees out of phase that spins around, the classic oscilloscope that you've seen. But it also is capable of producing a longitudinal wave, which is sort of like a pressure wave. So my voice is resonating the air molecules and it's coming at you longitudinally, and it's pushing this longitudinal wave out like this, rather than what you see on the oscilloscope in that standard sine wave. That's just a standard Hertzian wave. And so this longitudinal waves are really unique because you're able to push those longitudinal waves through things. It's kind of like something hitting this wall causing the vibration, and if I bang on it hard enough, the guy on the other side of the wall hears this banging, and so that longitudinal wave's moving through the wall. So we're able to put those waves to be able to move through you and to be able to move through even things that electromagnetic frequencies can't get through, like a Faraday cage. The plasma in the tubes is the perfect medium for propagating longitudinal waves. And you might have seen me with some of the videos with the long fluorescent tube on the Theraphi, and you can literally see the longitudinal waves coming through the plasma tube on there. And so that was the plasma being lit inside the tube longitudinally, and you can also see it hit the end and bounce back. And so that's what we call a time reversal wave. And a lot of what we talked about and what famous people like Guy Obolinski, if you're familiar with his Teslatron machine over the years, was really big into time reversal, and that was a big part of the concept of, we thought, well, maybe something's happening as these waves penetrate in your body. It's taking the cells back into a more coherent state, maybe even all the way down to the DNA level. Now, that seems very strange from a standard electrical engineering kind of point of view, because you're saying, well, wait a minute, some of these wavelengths, like very low frequencies, can be miles long, and very high frequencies, the higher the frequency gets, the shorter and shorter they get. But really high frequencies into like what your cell phone's running at and your microwave oven, into the gigahertz range, those are still long. They're still bigger than a cell in your body. And so what I'm proposing is one of the, and a lot of this stuff is very mysterious. It's very esoteric, and a lot of people don't understand these things. And we're starting to glean it with quantum mechanics and understanding like that we'll talk about if we get some time. But what happens in plasma is you can create smaller individual wave packets, and those can get very small. And so there are multitude cascade of frequencies in there. So just something, a side note, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about these days on how some of these things work. Of course, some of my heroes are Sir William Crookes and Nikola Tesla. Crookes was one of Tesla's mentors, and he invented the Crookes tube. And as you can see, it looks a lot like the Crookes tube. What he was doing was putting an anode and a cathode, so he was running DC, again, both sides of the polarity into the tube, which is how it's just commonly been done since then until the single wire transmission Theraphi tubes. And this is how the television was invented, basically. Of course, other people took it farther, but this became the cathode ray tube, CRT tube, that was in the original televisions. Do you remember that, the big glass? I know it seems so archaic now, and the younger generations are like, what are you talking about? Isn't it a touch screen? So what he did was he put this metal shape in there, Maltese cross, that could flip down, and he found that it projected a shadow on the screen, and that basically was the evolution of the original television screen. They eventually figured out how to put a coil on there to steer the electron beam, and it scanned and had different parts of information that displayed a full picture eventually. So yeah, these guys were really the inspiration for it, and Tesla worked a lot with these kind of tubes. So here's some original Tesla bulbs. He found that he could create the plasma into being directional. He came up with the first tubes that had like the plasma balls that you've all seen, where you put your hand on them and the arcs go to your hand. Plasma is really interesting stuff, and it's very common. A lot of people think it's all really obscure or whatever, but it's what's in all your fluorescent lights. It's what a candle is, what a flame is, what fire is. The entire universe is 99.9% plasma. It's also 99.999% hydrogen. So there's a big key between matter and hydrogen and plasma. And here we see lots of different things. The key to different types of plasmas is how much energy is in there. And of course, you can have a little bit of energy and run one of these little glowing Tesla balls, or you can have a lot of energy and you can have what the sun runs on, or nuclear reactors and tokamak reactors. This is what we're trying to do in creating hot fusion and as containing the plasma, and nobody's really been able to do it enough to get enough energy out. We pump a lot of energy in and get about the same amount of energy we pumped in out until the whole thing melts down, and that's what happens all the time. It's kind of like going about it the wrong way. It's kind of like if you wanted to hammer a nail into this wall, it's kind of like picking up the wall and whacking the wall on top of the hammer and the nail to try to get the nail in. So there is better ways, and they'll be coming soon. So, and cold fusion was one of them, but of course that got dispelled. And but ever since Pons and Fleischmann, cold fusion research has gone on and been very successful. And it won't be long now before we realize that energy is just a matter of being able to generate it and contain it in very efficient ways. And one day we're all going to have a little box, maybe the size smaller than the speaker, probably a little suitcase. It'll be your lifetime supply of power. You'll just carry it with you wherever you go. You plug it into your car. You can drive all around the country on it. You'll never fill up with gas. When you get home, you'll plug it into your house and it'll run your house. It's very likely that these things exist. You just don't don't hear about it yet. So some of the early tubes, I've got tubes that I've built like 20, 30 years ago that are still running today, which is amazing because it's hard to get them to be really perfect. And I've read tons of books on tube technology, and this was the very first Theraphi tube, which we have here, sort of a museum piece. Now, because it's evolved a little bit. The next version had similar type of electrodes in it, and what I did was I tapered this down to fit more phi ratio. Everything in Theraphi was all based on golden mean. From Dan's frequencies all the way up to how the electronics are laid out on the board, the ratio of turns in the Tesla coils, and the geometry of these tubes. So its phi ratio, it's 1 to 1.618. And that produces like a golden mean triangle that you would see if you had a pentagram, let's say, each one. And a pentagram is the perfect representation of phi. Every segment on there is 1 to 1.618. So one of those peaks on there. And I was into pyramid power when I was a kid, and I built a lot of pyramids and stuff like this. And one of the interesting things that started happening was, especially in Russia, the Russians are always cutting edge on all this kind of stuff. They started building elongated pyramids. Everybody was building like a Giza pyramid, 52.51 degree angles, and the Russians started building these phi ratio pyramids, and they started putting them in fields. And they're building really tall pyramids in order to increase crop yields for agriculture. Because as we knew from all the pyramid type literature that came out in the 70s and that, you could sharpen razor blades in them, you could put an apple inside a pyramid, it wouldn't rot, all kinds of things like this. So it made sense that how the Egyptians were using them, and it made sense that there was some kind of energy source there. So the Russians experimented a lot with that. And when they put them in these fields, they found not only did it increase their crop yields and things like this, but they started having plants grow that have been extinct for thousands of years, started popping up around these pyramids. So there's a really interesting phenomenon when you are able to use this golden mean ratio. And of course, we've talked a lot about that over the years. And everybody today is there anybody here that has not heard of the golden mean? See? This is part of the conscious evolution. When I was a kid and I was into this stuff, people just thought I was out to lunch. They were like, oh yeah, that's that crazy guy. We don't know what the heck he's talking about. There's no such thing as pyramid energy and all these kind of things. But as we become more understanding, and geometry plays a big part of this. Geometry, sound, and color. When we see colors that we haven't seen before, it's part of our conscious evolution. Marcel Vogel, one of my mentors, studied fireflies when he was a kid, and in the 60s he invented fluorescent colors. Nobody had ever seen fluorescent colors before. So what that did was elevate the consciousness of common people, because now we suddenly saw something new, something we hadn't seen. And remember, they made all the psychedelic posters and the black light posters you put in your room with the lights and everything. And again, ultraviolet spectrums and pulling those colors into there. So there's a lot of really unique things that happen in conscious evolution in colors, and being able to understand these concepts. One of the best things in a geometric sense you can do is build forms like that one hanging up there. I always say to people that have a newborn baby, and I say, you know what, go out and get all the platonic solids, and instead of the old mobile with the animals on there, hang platonic solids above the crib, right? And because for me, that's what really kicked it off. When I was a kid, I built origami platonic solids and all the different duals and stellated shapes and things like that. And that's what really got me to start to think about this stuff. And I remember probably one of the first things I ever made was a Mobius strip. You know, I took a newspaper and cut a strip out of it, and I saw it on, I don't know, in a magazine or something in a book, And I made some paste with some flour and water, twisted it, and stuck it together, and it was a perfect ring. And then I cut it apart with the scissors, and it turned into 2 rings. And that just blew my mind. I was like, that was it. From then on, I was a geometry nut. So this is just a regular straight tube that's sitting again like in proximity to the Theraphi, it's just sitting on the bed. But the logo of the Theraphi is from inscription in Dendera, which has these tubes with sort of shaped like this, more bulbous, but it has a serpent going through them. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, those are the ancient light bulbs. They had ancient light bulbs in these days. And so this serpent that sort of appeared in here in the wavy lines even has its tail, I don't know if you can see the detail there, like a rattlesnake nodes. In these harmonic nodes, you can see the longitudinal wave propagating at the end of the tail. So all nature and all patterns of life forms and everything falls into these geometric patterns too. We saw this in Hans Jenny's cymatics and sound, and you'd see spinal cords form on these metal plates. And so it's the same thing. The plasma is the perfect medium for that. So it really ties into a lot about creation. And this is what we talk about. One of Callie and my biggest ideas behind the premise of this kind of technology is to make it a conscious type device that is able to work with your consciousness. So the plasma is a conscious field, and in the ancient alchemists, you know, I teach a lot of courses on alchemy, and I always say that consciousness is a field. And we're going to talk about fields here in a bit, but that field permeates all things, and all things have consciousness. What the alchemists were saying was that even a rock has consciousness. And it's what is consciousness? Something about being self-aware and all these kind of things, but being able to utilize these type of devices to do things like amplify your intentions. Perhaps it's one of the ways that it's actually working. Perhaps it has healing properties because in the field, that's what you're entering into the field with, right? And perhaps it relies a bit on the operator. One of the things that we do when we bring people into the field, people show up at the clinic and things like this, and they're like, oh yeah, I've got the bad shoulder and the bad hip, and we're like, you know what? Forget all that. Clear it. Cancel, clear, because you want to be going in with perfect, pristine, clear thoughts, because where your thoughts are, action follows. So all action, everything, all of this is all pure creation of what we thought first. We thought it first before this existed. So action follows thought, and that's one of the first primary fundamental understandings of how the universe works. So you can utilize this type of technology for exactly that. And you can put multiple tubes on the Theraphi too. This is 4 tubes running on the Theraphi, which gets really crazy. And fractals. So the other thing about plasma is it really is a very good conduit and a medium for fractals to form. This is a big part of nature. Fractals are recursive. They repeat patterns over and over infinitely, all the way down the scale and outwards the scale. When Mandelbrot and these guys first wrote the mathematical formulas for these things, we didn't have computers. This is how great of thinkers they were and mathematicians, and they envisioned this, but people were like, yeah, no, that's all crazy. It's a repeating pattern that goes in an infinite loop, and it has infinite scale. That's wonderful. There's nothing really big to it. Well, it just turns out that today, once we were able to create computers that could generate, take these algorithms and generate some different colors and things like that, and we saw these patterns, that changed everything. This is how all CGI for computer-based graphics and everything came about, you can render forests, mountains, clouds, sky, all these things in nature with these simple algorithms. So it seems that nature uses these repeating algorithms over and over and over again to create everything in the universe. You see it on a macrocosmic scale all the way out to the galaxies and the cosmos, to microscopic scale in small things, seashells and everything in life. And now we're finding them all the way down at subatomic particles and beyond. And so the plasma is a perfect medium for that too. And a lot, well, not a lot of people. This is sort of an obscure little niche thing here. When I was first building a lot of the tubes, and a lot of them like these ones here with the electrodes built inside of the tubes, when you get a good look at what's going on in the electrode, you'll see the plasma sort of skirting around, and it kind of has a mind of its own. If you go like this to it, it'll move, and it'll be like, whoop, and it'll change, and it'll do things, and it's really hard to control. That's why they're having a problem with these big cold hot fusion reactors, is because when you generate that much power and that much plasma, it's got a mind of its own. It doesn't want to be in there, and they're trying to contain it really, really hard. And it doesn't like being contained. So they'll move around, and you can see these guys did a study where they show these fractal patterns on electrodes inside of a plasma, inside a vacuum chamber. And those patterns move all around. Eric Dollard came up with what he calls the cosmic induction generator, which was two basic Tesla coils like this that point at each other. And they're 180 degrees out of phase like that. You can do that with this, which is cool. In the null zone in between, we talked a lot about what's happening with the phase relationship on these tubes is they're bouncing up and down like two buckets like this. So when one's plus 10, the other's minus 10. Plus 10 plus minus 10 is 0. So there's a 0 point sort of field right in the center of the two of them. So what Eric did with the cosmic induction generator is he took an incandescent bulb and he was sticking it in the 0 point, because when you move the fluorescent tube around, you'll see the fields around there. And what's really strange is the standard electromagnetic field just travels from point A to point B. Why would there be a 0 point in the center? It's not the case with Tesla coils. There's something very unique about it. And when Eric put a clear incandescent light bulb in there, he got all these fractals. And he got some of them that started to form spirals. And they look like little miniature galaxies forming inside of there in the plasma, all these stars and everything like this. And he was like, wow, look at that. And then boom, the bulb exploded. So the cosmic induction generator, and Eric is probably one of them, you know, the most knowledgeable Tesla people on the planet today, and he's really great. And that's his cosmic induction generator coils. These fractals that get formed with high voltage, these are kind of becoming popular these days. They're basically these Lichtenberg figures. Back in the 1700s, this George Lichtenberg was the first to describe these. But you can just take a high voltage source, like a pretty good current, and you basically clip one side of the high voltage plate underneath a piece of wood, and you spray it with water, a little bit of salt water to get it conductive, and you take the other end of this high voltage probe. I don't recommend doing this at home, by the way, unless you know what you're doing, because that kind of power can kill you. But if you know what you're doing, you can safely hold this rod and point it at the wood, and it'll arc and form these fractal tree patterns. So really cool stuff. And there's a group that has a particle accelerator, and they can charge up pieces of acrylic. So this stuff here is acrylic. It's this clear plastic that we all know and love. And it has electrostatic charge. Anytime you pick up this stuff, you feel the hair stand up on your ends because it's a dielectric. And so dielectric medium is the opposite of conductive medium. So a lot of this is about dielectricity and capacitance. So capacitors are made up of a dielectric and 2 conductive plates on each side. So if I put a metal plate on each side, and this is how I used to build a lot of Tesla coils, is building big capacitors with glass plates, because glass is one of the best dielectrics. But a capacitor is basically a metal plate on each side, and you put a charge on it, and it'll hold the charge like a battery. And then you can charge it up and discharge it later on. Now we're doing this with carbon nanomaterials and graphene, and it's getting really cool. But we're making super strong supercapacitors that hold a ton of charge like a battery can, but you can charge it instantly and you can discharge it instantly. So what that's going to mean in the next couple of years is you'll plug your car in, your electric car, instead of waiting overnight to drive around for a couple hours the next day, you'll plug your electric car in for 15-20 minutes and you'll drive it for 3 or 4 hours. So that's where this technology is going. And so to give you an example of fractals inside of this acrylic, what these guys are doing, they'll take a big block of acrylic like this, and then they got a lead line concrete steel vault that they ride this thing in on a cart, and they point this 5 million volt 125 kilowatt particle accelerator at it, and they charge this sucker up with a whole lot of power, and it holds it much like because it's a dielectric, like a capacitor. And then when it comes out the other side, it's practically radiating with charge. You wouldn't want to put your finger on it because it would kill you dead. So what they do is they take a long probe with a nail or a pointy thing on it, and they discharge it to ground. And when it goes whack, poof, it freezes this lightning bolt right inside of the acrylic. Yeah, it's super cool. And so they're doing lots of stuff like this. So again, you see the fractal nature of this type of energy. And that's their website there, capturedlightning.com. This is the kind of energy that we're dealing with here. Of course, not enough to whack you, but it really gets you conditioned in this field. So it's part of the propagating of this field makes you part of the dielectric, and the same with the Theraphi, is you become the medium, the dielectric in this field. And because your body consists of different material, more denser material like your bones and cartilage, and then softer tissues like this, you're what's a non-linear dielectric. And this is important. This non-linearity is a part of storing this charge. And so when you're in the field, you're getting charged up in such a way. So we see this fractals everywhere in these trees, and you'll see fractals everywhere in nature, especially in palm trees and things like that. But one of those trees is not like the other. Right? What's going on here? So they got pretty clever. I mean, at least it's prettier than the ones that are all on the buildings outside here that might be right outside your apartment window and stuff, right?
Is that the feel good, everything's fine?
Yep, it's all fine. Yeah, so microwave technology. Now we've gone headlong into this concept of surrounding ourselves in this electromagnetic fields without any real thought or anything like this. And we're completely inundated with this now, and it's starting to become a hot topic for everybody these days. And part of the problem with, as I was saying, with digital frequencies is those pulsing steps on all those digital signals are pretty random, especially when you're downloading a video on your computer. Your Wi-Fi router is just like cranking out this sound that sounds like screaming demons in these really high frequencies that you don't hear, but your body does. And one of the issues with it is its noise. It's incoherent, right? And so this is one of the issues with it. When people say, oh yeah, 60 hertz, man, that's a bad frequency. It's not the frequency, it's the noise. Every time we plug in one of these switching power supplies, like everybody has on your cell phone and your computer and that, into the circuit in your house, it creates a noise because this is a switching power supply. It's switching at higher frequencies, and they all got interharmonics and transients and a lot of this basic noise that comes into the thing. So what your body is sensitive to is that noise. And just like listening to music on frequencies that you can hear, what happens when you listen to music, right? You get a good beat going and you start tapping your toe and you're like, yeah, it feels good. And your body naturally falls into these rhythms. So when you're just inundated with a chaotic, that becomes stressful. So one of the nice things about generating a coherent field like the Quantaphi does is that your body, you can play music to this. You put Mozart in this. So let's say you got your Wi-Fi router there and you got your computer here. Both of them are making this noise. But then you've got the Quantaphi running here with Mozart through it. Because this filter is going to be a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger, and it goes quite a ways. I've measured it about 20, 30 feet in each direction. And it's a more coherent field. What's your body going to tune to? Is it going to tune to the weak noise it's continuously done? Or does it go, breath of fresh air, I'm listening to Mozart now? So one of the neat things that the Quantaphi is able to do is sidetrack you. It doesn't block Wi-Fi signals. There's a lot of things out there saying they block Wi-Fi signals or override them and that. If they were blocking a Wi-Fi signal, then you wouldn't be, or your cell signal and you had a button on there or whatever, you wouldn't be able to talk. The way those kind of work is they kind of cohere the fields a little more to make them a little more coherent.
Can we play music through the Quantaphi at Alchemist Kitchen?
There's the Theraphi is there, not one of these yet.
Okay.
But tell them they got to get one. Okay. So here's the thing. Conditioning space. You could use this in somewhere like the Alchemist Kitchen or a yoga studio, let's say. Maybe you don't want to have sound or whatever. You don't have to. All you could do, you can set up a nice plasma tube array like this, put it up on the shelf somewhere, and be transmitting like Mozart or mantras, or how about your own personal affirmations where you record your own voice and you say, today I'm going to make $5 or whatever you want to say, right? Yeah. Okay, whatever. I'm honest. Yeah, that's not going to get you a cup of coffee. What am I thinking? So you can go like this. You might not want to put it in your store and say, peanut butter's on sale for $5.99. That's been done before with the old subliminal messages and that. These things are tools, right? This is one of the issues. So there's a lot of personal struggle that I've had with these kind of things over the years. It's like, wow, it could be used for evil, geez. But you kind of balance it out and say, well, I'm going to take on some karmic destiny or whatever if people do things like that. But I think that the thing is that don't be evil, right? Somebody else had that motto, and I don't know how they're doing right now. But anyway, so yeah, fractals in the cosmos. Yeah, that was their. Yeah, that's how Google started. Yeah.
Can you focus sound like you could a laser to affect ATP?
Yeah.
Just repeat the question.
Okay, so could you focus sound like a laser to affect ATP? So that's part of the things. There's definitely a lot of frequencies and resonances that are going on in mitochondria and stuff. It's a big discussion and things like this. But yeah, there are be frequency signatures that you could find to stimulate ATP for sure. And in the Spooky 2, they have a lot of cool stuff like that. In there, you could probably type ATP and they'll give you a set of frequencies for that. Yeah, so.
Can you measure like nanometers?
This is the hard part, is being able to measure and prove that. I mean, there's so much work that I think we will be able to do. It's very hard to do. We don't have the equipment to do it. We can't even measure these fields. We can't measure, things like these longitudinal fields and what a lot of people talk about a scalar. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Yeah, we can do that. So the part of it is getting enough technology to be able to see these things and then to prove the effects. The other thing is money. There's not a lot of interest in looking at these type of tech. There's a lot more now. Mind you, back in the 90s when I was building Rife machines and saying to people, yeah, you can, treat different diseases with resonant frequencies, they were like, oh yeah, that guy is out to lunch, he's crazy. But now it's really one of the hottest topics. And there is a lot of, what happened with electromedical type devices is all of these treatment type devices got sloughed off in the early days by powers that be. And granted, because there was, many charlatans out there trying to sell you. One of the famous ones was a little guy here in New York, a little ball that he said, you put this metal ball, my special ball, in a bucket of ice and you tie the string around your finger and it cures all these diseases. And he had a big list of things like this. So when the AMA was being formed and that, there was pressure from both the pharmaceutical sides and then there was pressure from just plain charlatans that were out there trying to make money. So the people said, we got to stop people, snake oil salesmen from doing these kind of things. Yeah, yeah. But what they did is they did a broad sweep, and they got rid of the snake oil salesmen, but they wiped everybody else who was doing real research in this kind of stuff, like Rife, and that was the problem. So that's the real truth behind it. It goes on both sides, but. Yeah, so this idea of these fields, it's all fields and all matter and everything we see getting created in these fields. And one of the things we've been looking for with the CERN reactor is all these particle colliders, smashing particles into bits and counting the pieces that come off and seeing how much smaller and smaller and smaller, looking for the God particle, right? So Peter Higgs and the Higgs boson is like one of the God particles that they're looking for. And how they're doing this is he was a theoretical physicist who came up with this idea of the Higgs field. And they've been searching for this, and they've pretty well found it. And he's pretty well right. He used this. Interestingly enough, he used the sign phi to represent the Higgs field. And the idea is that this Higgs field is sort of the underlining fundamental. Remember we had the ether theory back in the old days. We're kind of leaning back towards that. We just don't like to use that name anymore. But it's like this field that interacts with matter in the background of all things. And the way these smaller particles, these subatomic particles, have a strong interaction with the field. And then lighter ones, like electrons, only have a little bit ones. And things that have no mass, like a photon, moves transparently through the field. So you can see how light is sort of a dimensional aspect. So as we go to voluminous things, like stuff at the end of the periodic table that's very heavy, metals and things like that have a lot of weight, like lead. And then you go up to hydrogen getting very lighter, and then what comes before all of that, right? So these are where these particles, and it shows that the ancients were right. I mean, a lot of the ancient philosophers and everybody were talking about this, and You heard stories of when people were experiencing near-death experience, and all they saw was light, and all the matter disappeared and stuff. So there's stuff beyond in either direction, without a doubt. And the Higgs field is kind of interesting how it did that. And I'm pointing this out because one of the popular buzzwords that's come about with this kind of technology is everybody says, well, it's scalar energy, it's a scalar wave, and all these kind of things. The word scalar, to clarify a lot of this, because everyone has a scalar type device or gadget or whatever that you see, it kind of became a new age buzzword, but this is where it came from. And it was Tom Bearden that kind of popularized this in the sort of new age movement. And Tom was a brilliant guy, and he wrote some amazing stuff. But a lot of these things kind of people get carried away with, and then suddenly everything becomes this. But and this gets very complicated stuff when you get into quantum physics and quantum mechanics. But it's still, there's some basic principles that can be easily understood. So the phi ratio, or the phi symbol here in Higgs's formulas is basically the Higgs field. The Higgs field has a potential that varies up and down. So what scalar really means is it just has one order of like magnitude. So in electricity, you have voltage and current, how I was talking about. There's two orders of two things going there. Most everything has two things or more. In something that's scalar, just has a straight magnitude. So temperature. A thermometer is scalar because it has just one gradient of temperature. There's no other vector going off. So a scalar field has just one order of magnitude, and that's it. So the only thing that's really scalar, according to quantum physics, is the Higgs field. And so your scalar potential of that background Higgs field that is basically nothing, anything that's not matter, is able to have a potential of magnitude that goes up and down. And this is where the Higgs boson lies here that they've been looking for. And so that is sort of in a nutshell a simple way of looking at it. And we've been really good at being able to model this vacuum energy. So 0 point energy, this is the other words that get flown around. Free energy, 0 point energy, energy from the vacuum. This is a picture of the vacuum. This is nothing. This is absolutely nothing. So we're talking about this little cubic of space has been modeled inside of let's say an electron, or inside of an atom, because inside of an electron you have the nucleus, which would be your protons and your neutrons at the center, and then you have a cloud of these electrons outside. But as I've said many times before, that's a huge wide space in between, and in that space is nothing, and the electron shells, the electrons jump through. Well, they modeled nothing, and what they found was something, which is interesting. This is the quantum vacuum flux, and so this is like femtometers. So picture the space in between the nucleus and an electron inside an atom where there's supposedly nothing. But when they modeled it with a very, very fancy supercomputer, they found something. It's the quantum vacuum flux. And it's really cool because it's continuously going in and out of existence like foam.
There, 1 centimeter to boil all of the oceans of the...
Exactly. That's where that all came from, because when you do the math on this amount of energy, it's insane. So that's where the 0 point energy comes from. And the idea of taking free energy or energy from the vacuum is that we're tapping into this. Interestingly enough, this is where all matter starts to manifest, because these little subatomic particles ride on the top of these bubbles, and they jump around like a frog on lily pads on the pond. Doo, 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 doo. And they eventually stick together and they become protons and become matter. Where's that all coming from? We don't know. So that's kind of a summary, and we can fire this up real quick so everybody can kind of experience this. And I can show you a few little tricks. And then I'll fire it up, and then we can take some questions. So, or we can probably take questions now. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, let's fire it up so we can all see it. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, let me get something on here. What do you want? Do you want? Okay, let's go with that sine wave because that felt pretty good. And let's go. See, this is the thing. If you're playing pure tones like this, it's nice. But it'll drive you crazy after a while if you listen to it all in the speakers. So what I'll do is I'll just leave it really low. And then I'll turn on the tubes. So basically these coils are being modulated by the audio frequencies, and they're sort of wireless. You can kind of just hold them in proximity to the coils. And I'll leave it on and you guys can come by and play with this. Don't touch the top of the coil because you will turn the cold electricity into hot electricity, and that's not going to be fun. It's actually not too bad. I can touch it and I can show you what it's going to do. There's the sound. You hear it? That's a hot arc though, and it will burn your finger if you touch it with your finger, but I can touch it with this metal. And so to show you that the sound's actually there. So that sound's getting modulated into the plasma. And really, I can get pretty darn close to these things, which is really cool. So therefore, if I wanted to work on a particular organ or something like that, I can hold the tubes on here, and you can do a lot of fun things. The other thing, and you can't do this with the Theraphi because there's a lot of power, and you get something like that happening if you touch the tubes on there. So one of the things a lot of people asked about, they said, well, I want to touch that plasma. I want direct contact. I want contact like those contact Rife machines where I can hold on to it. So you can do that with this, fine. You can do all kinds of different configurations, like I was saying, antenna arrays. So you can get 4, 6, 8 tubes going, and this little 4-way cross here is really good for just an antenna array that you'd want to put in your house or your yoga studio or something like that, and keep running. Okay, I'll turn down the sound now. So yeah, we got that 1K hertz tone going in there. If we're playing something with a little more rhythm, which we'll do here in a bit, you'll see the plasma pulse, which is really cool. Where this sort of sound thing kind of came from, we did one really good example of this is, and we're going to do some experiments with some real audio files here in the next weekend. We were doing a show in South France, and there was a girl playing cello and another girl singing and playing guitar. And I was like, let's run this through the quantifier, right? So we had everybody in the room, and we had them mic'd going through the quantify, and we used it as a little PA. And I had the plasma tubes on. And I was experimenting on one song, I'd leave them on, and most of the people in the crowd couldn't see them. They were up around the side. And the next song, I turned it off. And a couple of people came up to me and they went, oh man, I heard the microphone fell off the cello on that second song. And I was like, oh really, yeah? Why? And they said, well, it sounded like it dropped out. I think the microphone either stopped working or dropped on the floor or something. I was like, okay, good. And so I've been doing little experiments like that to see about these things, and it's interesting what comes up. So that's one of the aspects of it. The other one that we should talk about really quickly is just conditioning the space. So creating this electrostatic field, and you being in that field and absorbing that, now you can run whatever you like to be in that field, which is nice. Yeah, so that's some of the main things about it. And you can also do other cool tricks with these coils. These are more novelty things because you create a bit of noise, you know, when you start to release that arc, like you heard it there. What's really cool about these coils is you can hear them, and they have a high frequency So they accompany kind of the sound. And I'm working on, and nobody's done this yet, to an extent. There's been a lot of electrostatic type speakers that have come out that are pretty darn clean, magnetoplaners and things like this that are really well, but nobody's made an actual plasma burning flame that sounds really pure. So you're going to hear a little bit of noise in this, but you're going to hear that frequency coming off the arc on the coil. See if I can get really crazy and pick this up. That's just the plasma off the tip of the needle resonating. Don't pick them up at home, just leave them. So that's kind of fun. It'll get louder and you can kind of fine tune it. So see how these are absorbing the energy, just like your body being the dielectric that'll absorb the energy too. You pull them off there and we can get really loud. So it sounds pretty good. Pure tones like this aren't bad. So we play the speakers and this. So you still get a bit of the noise. I want to get that really clean. I don't know if it can be done, but we're working on it. So that's fun. And one of the other sort of novelty things you can do. Make sure you got this off. Make sure you always have them switched off and unplugged when you go to modify any of these. Safety, safety, safety. And you keep one hand in your pocket. So these little, it's just a little wire with one 90-degree angle bent on here. Ion rotors. So what happens when you get a high alternating current running off of these guys, it'll divide it up into sort of a rotating magnetic field. I'd push these out pretty bad. And so you got your warp drive, Scotty. Or was it, who is the engineer man? Yeah, Scotty, wasn't it? I'm giving it all I've got, Captain. Yeah, a little more warp drive. There we go. Yeah. So we got your frequencies running through there as well. And if you can read that elven writing on there, let me know what it says. Faster! Do you want to go faster? So that's the square wave, or the sine wave, sorry. You can go pretty low. Really low is just like pulse, 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 right? You get pretty high. How fast do you want to go? Let's see. We're at 6.5 kilohertz here. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is where the older people in the room are going to stop hearing about here. Middle-aged people are still going to hear up to around here in the 20, 15 kilohertz, 20 kilohertz. The young children are going to hear up to this 20 kilohertz here. You're hearing a bit of the noise. And you still hear that. 17 kilohertz, 18 kilohertz, 19. And maxed out this app. And this is just a funky app on my phone, right? Bring it back down. So, square wave. And triangle wave. Bring it down where you hear it more. Square wave. Sine wave. And so this now, you see this pulsation. This is what Tom Baird, and if you followed his stuff over the years, called a pump wave. So now we're running 1.3 kilohertz with a mechanically generated pump wave to pulse the plasma. And this was one of the tricks we did back in the Rife days, was we'd pulse our plasma in order to drive those frequencies that we had riding on the carrier wave to drive them in there more. So similar to making a square wave out of another sine or other tone like that. So that's fun. And let's just say, okay, now what if we played some music? Let's play something. We'll get some kind of rock and roll music in here. What do we got here? Well, this could be crazy. How about some Jimi Hendrix? He would love this. Whoa. Standing in the field, this is pretty trippy. Wow. You're going to hear sounds that you've never heard before. Remember, it's part of the conscious evolution. Great for DJ setups. So with the spinning, you get a lot of phasing in the sounds, which are all phasing anyway, right? You hear all those phases. It gets a little more coherent here in a second. Boy, this is like one of my childhood dreams come true. One day I'm going to play Jimi Hendrix through plasma tubes, high voltage. So that's so you get that phasing noise. It looks cool, but yeah. The coils? It'll be louder with the needles, right? They kind of have like a Leslie speaker effect with these guys. So that's as loud as it gets there. But the main point is, look at the plasma, it's pulsing with the music. I can switch over to the needles if you want to hear it as a plasma tweeter, let's say. Okay, let's just do that. Okay, one more little demo. So you can hear the needles, because the needles with music sound a little more decent. Especially with the tubes, because you'll hear the distortion. I'll pull the tubes apart, and then you can hear how I can clean up that signal. So of course you got the distorted sound, but as we bring the tubes in, the tubes smooth that out. And you can take a lot of that noise out. Which is what the tubes are doing when the needles are off. It's not distorted, it's clean in the tubes. But that's just air plasma. And it's hot, don't touch it with your finger. You could probably light a piece of paper on there on fire, so you have to be mindful when you're using it. It's one of the caveats as an experimental device. So that's just the plasma? Yeah. And there you go. You add in a bit of this. And so yeah, you can kind of have fun like that. But I don't know. For me, this is what you want. You just tone that right down. You can have it for like a romantic little candle flame on the dinner table or whatever. But now you got the sound, but most of it going through the plasma. Yeah. Lots of fun. Okay. Yeah, so that's that, to Quantaphi.
So folks, just hang in there for
Yeah.
30 seconds, because we're going to take some questions, and I want to film the questions. I've got a mic here. And don't forget that if you're on our database, we've been filming this evening, and you'll be able to get a copy of this if you're on our database, because we'll send it out in about 4 or 5 days' time through our newsletter.
So we're still playing the Jimmy through the plasma. Great, we had a guy from Norway, and he came, and he was all excited and everything. He listened to all the talk, and at the end he asked a question. He's like, kind of half speaking English, half Norwegian, and half body sign language. I understood what he was saying. And he's like, I started learning English 2 months ago because I wanted to come to this conference. And so, yeah, he's actually did a pretty good job
Essentially,
in
when we go
2
to
months.
France, everybody is from the rest of the world except for France. Because they just want to come to the south of France, and none of the locals really show up.
Yeah, yeah.
So, if you don't mind, I'll pass this around for questions. It just means that we can
There's
get it
first
recorded. Yeah.
But being able to counter it, part of what the Quantaphi will be able to let you do is tune to it rather than that. So if you've got that Wi-Fi, the 5G in your neighborhood, and you have this in your house, it's not going to protect you from the 5G by blocking the 5G, but what's going to protect you from the 5G is by distracting the cells in your body from the 5G or overriding them, and you'll feel more comfortable with these frequencies that we know that these frequencies are based on more healing frequencies.
This cover.
It will cover this room easily. So a good 20, 30 feet, yeah, in each direction. So in a diameter. And it depends on how you set up your arrays too. I like to go either side, one on each side, or go like this, and you can adjust these. And you can do a field strength meter and look at it. Animals love the Theraphi. They get right in the sweet spot. They know where the 0 point is in the center. However, they're going to be curious about the lights and stuff like this, and they might put their paw in there. This is not going to kill them. Like I'm touching a metal rod and I'm arcing like this. Oh yeah, we are still playing too. They're going to get it burned right on the end of the finger, and they'll probably never touch it again. So it's not going to kill your cat or you if you touch it with your finger, like that. But if you do that and you smell your finger, instantly it's now. This is part of the hot electricity, which is destructive, and cold electricity, which is constructive. So I instantly had a healing field turn into a pure discharge from cold energy in this dielectric field around here to a pure discharge of hot energy, and I can smell my finger right now. Those cells are burnt. They're completely annihilated. And there's a little micro, if you looked at it, yeah, exactly. And if you looked at it on a microscope, I killed off a couple hundred cells in this direct beam. This is how plasma works, and it's very powerful in that way. So yes, you have to use caution. And
A question here.
yeah,
No, I was just, what you see here, is this what you get?
yeah, 2 tubes.
Okay.
We brought extra tubes to show you how you can connect it up. But yeah, it's 2 tubes with the 2 coils, the amplifier, and all the interconnects for the cabling and stuff. Yeah.
And it comes with all the attachments.
Yeah, no speakers. Sorry. Yeah,
No,
then you get
saying
use
like
your own
supply.
speakers.
Those little sticks
Yeah,
and
yeah, the sticks and the spinners and
whatever.
I brought a few other little toys too that I'll throw in, like neon tubes. You can also take fluorescent light bulbs and neon light bulbs and stuff and
And you can add more to this?
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
like?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
You can add more tubes.
Right.
Yeah.
How many tubes can you go up to in this unit?
I've put 6 on each coil.
Okay.
So you could have 12 going. You really
Does
want
that
to get a lot.
extend the, you know, the
Yeah,
area?
yeah.
By how
It spreads
much?
out the field in a more even
So
array.
you could
So
rent it out to your neighbor in Manhattan?
yeah, right. You got to tell your neighbor next door because he's in the field too. Because these fields will penetrate through.
Do you need to have an even number of tubes?
Not necessarily. No, we could stick 3 over here. Actually, 3 might.
Using it every day, what is the life span of the tubes? Like,
Okay,
for-
yeah, now this is a curious thing because what I've been doing with the tubes, some of the tubes, and this is a really weird science because plasma does very strange things, just like you saw it pierce the hole through those cells in my skin. It does weird things to the glass, it does weird things in there too. Some tubes last indefinitely for the Theraphi. And other tubes seem to wear out after heavy use. A lot of people that have them in clinics and they're running them 8 hours a day. Every couple of years, they send them back to get filled up. And then I uncap them and refill them with gas. Once they've been refilled after the first time, they seem to last a lot longer. I'm estimating, because these have not been run for too long. I've ran them for 24 hours straight on these coils, but I don't know, I haven't run it long enough to see if it's going to degrade or how long it'll be. But it's just a matter of refilling them if they do that. They're like pop bottles that you just
What's the
refill.
what's in there?
Just ask the question.
The gases that are
Yeah,
in
what
here?
are the gases
So
in
yeah, this is a combination, proprietary combination of noble gases. So at the far right of the periodic table, you have...
We have to torture you.
Yes. You have these, they call them noble gases because they supposedly don't interact with anything else. They call them, they don't form any other compounds, molecular compounds. They used to anyway. Some tricky, good scientists and chemists have been able to mix them with things, but it commonly can't be done. But they're very unique in that they won't react with other things. They are susceptible to magnetic fields. You put a magnet above here and you can steer it around. And they do a lot of really neat things. It's against the law to cure cancer.
Well, you don't. You sound like Bernard Jensen when he said the same thing. He said it was very worthwhile.
Go back to Canada.
It was very worthwhile to go to jail because he was treating cancer with foods. But shall we rephrase it and say,
Yeah.
can either of these machines be aimed at irregular cells or unhealthy cells?
Yeah.
That's a good way of
Yeah,
rephrasing it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this was part of the idea with the time reversal process and restoring cells to a more coherent order. And it's been a topic of discussion with the longevity that we've been talking about, and Roger's been a big proponent and providing a lot of information.
Going to
on-
be healing nutrition, guys.
Yeah.
Got students here tonight.
Yeah, look at some of them are still have been here for a long time. They're still here, and yeah, it's a big part of it. And the way I see it is, you use it as a preventative kind of thing. So technically, it's a research device. It's an electrical research device, experimental research device. However, using it for those kind of things is probably what most people have in mind when they're doing. And so it's part of the experimental process. And with the results that we've had so far, and I can't make any claims, but from what other people have said, it seems like a lot of positive results have been made. Now let me quantify this when we're talking about disease like cancer. These are tools. These are not magic bullets. And you might hear people out there, yeah, it's a great machine that cures cancer. There's no such thing as a great machine that cures cancer, because if there was, it would be a reality. These are tools. You have to understand disease, what disease is, and what caused the disease. And when you understand the core root, because different people can have the same disease that they label multiple sclerosis. In this group of 50 people, they all have multiple sclerosis. It's just a manifestation of how the particular source for that disease is manifesting in different people that looks like what is called that multiple sclerosis, okay? Everybody has the potential of having a different cause in that disease. What you have to do is find a good naturopathic physician, or what do they call them now? The functional doctors, who can target and discover the root cause of what caused that disease. Because when you know that root cause of that disease, then that's when the tools come out. And this is another tool in your tool pouch that you go to the target, and when you work on that target of what caused that disease in that particular individual, you get success. This is why we're failing in this old paradigm medical model, is because we're trying to classify and categorize everything in all these unique individuals and with all these unique sets of conditions, and put them under one umbrella and saying this particular chemical as a pharmaceutical will work for that. But we're never going back and addressing the real root cause. So that's the main point.
Well, just a little comment on that, Lifa. You know, if you go to the theraphi.tech website, there's a great, you know, kind of history of so-called wellness healing with electromagnetic energy from Tesla onwards. And then in the 1970s, Priori, with the French Academy of Science, they did phenomenal testing with what's called phase conjugation. And they did a lot of clinical trials, but they were mainly using animals, right, at that time. And they had validated results across the board. So, and that's what the Theraphi technology is based on. But there's been no clinical trials done with the Theraphi. Would love to do some, believe me. Mm-hmm. Questions?
Next here.
I just had a quick question. So when you apply it locally, can you apply it anywhere in the body?
Oh yeah, good question. Now I'm not giving medical advice or anything here.
Is there some
I would
place
say
that you
where
should
not
be
to apply
Right,
it.
okay.
I wouldn't put it on your thyroid.
Okay.
You can overstimulate your thyroid, and this is the same for any light therapy devices. If you have any of the LED laser type devices that you're using like this, you can, the thyroid and certain glands like that are sensitive to light, like your pineal gland. You're probably not going to get it into there. Pituitaries and things like that, so I'd avoid this area here.
Okay,
Yeah.
and if you want to do a local application, how far away from, let's say, the coil do you have to be when it's not effective?
So to keep it going pretty
you have
well,
to be very close,
it's
so.
awkward.
Okay.
It's awkward, but what I think I'm going to start
As long as you have
including
light in
is
there.
so we can do a single wire transmission. You can run a wire to an electrode on here, but you can manage. I mean, if you're playing around and you got a table and you had another table setting aside and you wanted to work on your liver or whatever, you could kind of roll around it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's tricky. And the other thing is getting, if it was wired like that, it's possible to have another person apply it. So one of the things you can do is get those really cool silicone oven mitts. I use them for everything. And so if the applicator was holding that, they'd be insulated from the tube, and then you're just treating or you're not treating, sorry, you can't treat. You're just applying it to your client, yes. Yeah.
So questions up the back, could you just pass that up the back there? Way back there.
Hi.
Yeah, it's on. You won't hear your voice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talking about longevity and reversing some process in the body from the cellular level and DNA and molecular level, can we approach to the body by, like a complex system and kind of restore and heal the ethereum body, like electromagnetic body of the whole what I'm trying to tell you,
whole
because all our problems, it's not only in casual level on the
Yes.
you know, if we dig. So if we restore the Ethereum body, everything can be like neurodegenerative, cancer, anything, mutations.
Yeah, exactly. So what she's saying is, if you we're working with a particular ailment, working with the whole field is much more beneficial to work with the whole field, because that and then working on trying to point it at something like I was doing here. Now, absolutely, and that's the basic premise behind this, because what this is doing is creating the field. You're just standing in the field. Everything is better in the field. So you're affecting the whole field of your body. So you'll see these tubes react with each other. So if I move like them around here, you see it on a bigger scale with how I was moving the smaller tube in there. Your body is interacting with these because they're all similar volumes of dielectric material. So in standing within this field, you are treating the whole field of your body. So yeah, very good. And that is the basic premise.
Do you actually feel it, guys? Do you feel it? Do you feel a little bit more alive, and you're not getting tired tonight, and you can stay here for another 5 hours? When this first came out, we didn't sleep for 3 days.
Yeah,
and
that's
we
true.
were completely coherent.
Yeah.
We released it in Belgium, and we didn't sleep for 3 days.
We were running all day long. Oh.
2 tubes.
2 tubes and 2 coils.
2 coils.
Yes, tube, and then you can add on as many if you like. Yeah.
Yep. Just when I was using Theraphi often in a place, there wasn't as red
right
in there. What was it still effective? Is it still effective?
Absolutely. As long as they're lighting up.
Okay.
So the colors, it's very hard to mix these colors to get them perfect. These are pretty good right now.
Okay.
And I've experimented a lot over the years with different combinations and different ways of making the gases operate in there. So you can see a lot of the tubes will separate where part of the gases will differentiate, and it also has to do with time, and it also has to do with the particular individual that's in there. I've seen different people get in there and they change, which is really cool. It's and how they interact with people.
Right, but they're still effective.
And you get people that are heavy meditators and stuff like that. They lay down there. You can see their crown chakra pulsing inside of the tube. It's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, so he's saying, is there any other optional features that will clip on, like the Tesla coils, to the Quantaphi? And the answer is not at the moment, but yeah, it's definitely in the works. Several really cool add-ons are coming, like the Theraphi.
What is the function of the blue light?
The blue light just looks cool.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, is that...
And we could disconnect it too. I should probably put a little switch on it, yeah.
You need to run the blue light,
Yeah.
trading glasses.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, good.
In the back there. So thanks for coming tonight. Feel free to hang out a little bit longer, because we've still got lots of wine. You know, we're very, very into hospitality around here. Lots and lots of wine, lots of cheese. And if you line up here, Kelly can give you some more Theraphi. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you.
Paul.
Thank you.
And thanks, Kelly.
Looking good. And I turn on this coil. Bam! That coil would be like, boom! Punch this one out, we're dead. And I'd have to rebuild it. And I went through about 30 to 50 coils and about $10,000 in electronics. Blowing up Tesla coils to get it to do this.
That's how you make it. You're right.
And that was 3 years. 3 years.
You were asking, why is it, when you get close to it, why does the light get brighter?
Because you're distorting the field. So you're part of the field. So you're absorbing the energy. And the plasma has an intelligence and it likes you. So it wants to come towards you.
It likes just me.
Yeah. And different people have different effects. Like I said, you see different colors.
Oh, you did say that.
Yeah. And the crystals.
Intelligence.
All the plasma goes back. the crystal.
Put your hand in.
You watch, show them the crystal. Watch what this crystal does. So now, crystals charging. The crystals interact with the field too.
It's subtle, but it's
What
there.
about if the crystal's over here, like the hand?
Try it out.
I mean, 'cause we're listening.
You meant to say try it. If he was eavesdropping.
Oh, yeah, oh, wow. So it's just like the hand, but don't get too close.
Yeah, boom, boom.
Don't get too close.
Okay, let's try it without the crystal.
But we're crystals too.
He doesn't want to get zapped.
Yeah, let me use my appetite crystal.
It will really zap you if you put the crystal on it. Like it'll arc to the crystal. Yeah, I don't recommend it.
What if you wrap a copper wire around the crystal?
Yeah, you really like this one.
Well, I'll show you.
Hold on, I have an opportunity.
I'll show you the art. And the sound. Look, that's what it did to my head. I ran out of songs.
Did you touch the tip when it burned you?
I didn't have to.
It burned you before you got there. Oh, wow.
Now listen to the art. Sound is in the arc itself.
Why does one go out?
It's taking the energy. They work together as a pair. You listen to that.
Oh, the music. Yeah, the music.
The music is in the ark. That's how the Ark of the Covenant works.
Holy shit!
That's wild.
Wow.
And that's what's in that's what you're seeing in the plasma. It's modulating the plasma. That's the beat of the music in the plasma. So it's creating a field.
They have this pedal.
Does any sound out through the
It has a plastic tube.
sending that music into like a crystal would emanate?
Exactly. So this music that I'm playing right now in the drum machine is coming out into this field.
Right.
So we're talking about taking it to a whole nother level, right?
Oh, yeah.
No, this is just a preset. But this thing is insane.
Oh, but the 18 solfeggio frequencies.
Cycles of fifths.
So that's what I want to do. So they have like that. This 6-inch screws. Yeah.